Welcome to another episode of the Sparkles of Gold Astrology Manifesto podcast. My name is Nicolas Polimenakos, aka Sparkles of Gold. We are here with another episode of 3 questions, and tonight I am with
Demetra.
Thanks for being on the podcast. We're recording this from NORWAC 2023, the conference that's just outside of Seattle, which I think it's in its 39th year. Incredible. This isn't one of the questions I'm asked. I'm going on the flyer. What was the first time here? Do you know? You remember?
Well, the first time I attended as a participant was the year after it started. So did they start in 1984?
Maybe.
And that might have been 1985. That was the first year I came.
Oh, wow.
As a brand new young astrologer, not knowing anyone.
Yes. And then, I'm going to get back to the final. Tonight at the last lecture after Sam's lecture was daring, was that question, all the first timers, who's the first timer here? And there, again, for 2 years in a row, It looked like the majority of the room was first time. So I'm just saying that for people who aren't here, and all age levels, by the way. So not just young, all age levels for first time. So okay, now we'll get to the first question. Demetra, what's your favorite astrological technique?
Oh, what is my favorite astrological technique? I have heard it said that the very first thing you learn when you take an astrology class is the thing that you stay with the rest of your career. Mm-hmm. And in my case, it happens to be true. And in 1973, I attended a class at the Portland Astrology Center. And because I was already studying astrology on my own, I was able to go into a more advanced class, which was Rudhyar's 8 lunation phases.
Oh, wow.
Right. And our teacher was a student of Marc Robertson, who was a brilliant Seattle astrologer that died way too young. And Marc reshaped Rudhyar's 8 lunation phases and the progress lunation cycle. And so over the years, I've done progress lunation phase lifetime readings for individuals. And it's been the most profound technique of seeing how one's life unfolds in 30-year cycles in accordance with the meaning of each of the 8 phases of the moon.
Oh, wow. And I'll say for people listening that Rudhyar wrote a book called The Lunation Cycle.
Yes. And Marc Robertson was a student of Rudhyar, and there have been progressive astrologers putting Rudhyar's language into more accessible ways that astrologers can utilize.
I totally understand. Just got to break it down a different way. It's funny, interesting you mentioned Marc too, because I have a couple books on my shelf, but they're not like books that you think of. They were like kind of workbooks,
little pamphlets. Yeah.
I have his 8th house one. Mm-hmm. I think I have a Saturn one, and the way it was even designed, it was different than a regular book.
Yes.
Just for people who are going to research this stuff, but. Oh, so that's interesting. So, and I also like what you said about what sticks with you the first thing, and so on and so forth. And I will say that today I was sitting with a friend, and they just bought a book in the bookstore. Mm-hmm. And you know what book it was, Demetra? It was Finding Your Way Through the Dark. Yes. And I said something, I want to really get to know these just the phases, and so on and so forth. And anyway, I thought I'd bring that up because... so on and so forth. Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering the first question.
Okay.
Second question. What's your earliest memory connected to astrology?
My earliest memory connected to astrology was I was a sophomore in college. And there were a group of upperclassmen who I heard, and I was going to school in New Paltz, which is 100 miles north of New York City. Mm-hmm. And I heard of a group of upperclassmen who are driving to New York City once a week to take an astrology class. And I thought that was so incredibly exotic. And those astrologers, were demigods in those classmates were demigods in my mind, that there was no way I could say, hey, could I come along? But what was fascinating about that is that they said, and not only do we learn astrology, but our teacher cooks us dinner. And it was probably 10 years later, that was maybe 1965, it was 1973, when I was attending my first astrology conference, that I met Eleanor Bach, who had just published the very first Asteroid Ephemeris. And it turned out that Eleanor was the teacher that these upperclassmen were going to study with, and that she was inspired by wanting to know where Ceres, the goddess of food making, was in the sky, that prompted her to get astronomers to develop the ephemeris. So it was years before I ever met the person who would change my life as providing an entrance into astrology. That was my very first awareness of astrology.
Oh, wow. That's funny how the synchronistic and the connection.
I know how the threads of our fate appear years before we even recognize that that's
totally. Wow.
The fabric.
Yeah, and I will say this too, because we're a couple different things here. We talked about, I asked you your favorite technique and what was imprinted on you with progressive lunar phases, so on and so forth. Now you're talking about asteroids, and I think it's interesting here. We were talking the other day off record about your last so many years of the 2 books you recently published, the Hellenistic techniques, the theory, all this stuff here, and even before, a lot of people from other times know you in a different way through asteroid work, and several of your books. And then here you are, and I noticed lately here at NORWAC, and you have a retreat in Palm Springs later this year, Asteroid.
Right.
Asteroid work.
Right. Having completed 1,400 pages of ancient astrology. I need a luxury vacation. And going back to some of my early loves with mythic astrology and the asteroids, I'm devoting the rest of 2023 anyway to just indulging in that.
Go back to thinking about these threads you're talking about weaving, and here you are. Did you ever think it was going to end up like at this point here, So thank you for answering the second question.
Okay.
All right, third question. What's a book or books are you reading right now in a sense that don't have anything to do with astrology? And let me stop here, because every time I ask this question to astrologers, they're everything always has to do with astrology. And I know that, we know that, but I'm wondering, is there any books in your life that are reading that of whatever kind of subject, nonfiction, fiction, anything?
I love to read historical fiction. And most recently, there are 2 books written by crime, suspense, contemporary novelists called City on Fire and City of Dreams, which are the first 2 in the trilogy, which are a modern retelling of the Aeneid that was written by Virgil, and about how Aeneas left Troy when it was up in flames after the Greeks conquered it, and he traveled and founded Rome. And now he has set his story in the 1980s in Providence, Rhode Island, as a war between 2 mafia families going on. But all of the characters are recreating the characters in Aeneas' story and travels.
Oh, nice.
So I read this, I was captivated. I said, and this is so-and-so, and that's Helen, and that's Paris. But then in searching more, I found a book called Lavinia, which is written by the Portland sci-fi author Ursula Le Guin.
Oh, Le Guin,
Le Guin, and it's the story of Lavinia, a princess of Italy, who is the woman that Aeneas marries and founds the race of Romans. And in it is integrated so many of the Roman rituals and religion, including, Lavinia, who's a princess of a local king who lives in the forest, of tending the rights of Vesta.
Oh, wow,
right.
Wow. Here we are.
Here we are. That's where my mind is wandering, like in after astrology hours.
Yeah. Oh no, that's great. I thank you for answering that too. It was the beginning of COVID. I was going back from Seattle and Portland. I was listening to Ursula's books, the trilogy. I forget I can't remember, but and fascinating history, especially with her in the Pacific Northwest of Portland and Seattle, so on and so forth. I usually end here with the third question, but I'm going to give you a little branch off of a book thing. Demetra, was there a book in whatever age of your life, very young or whatever, that when you read it, it rocked your world, it changed you, it hit your heart, your mind, everything, and changed you forever, captured you? Is there any book you remember in the past when you were young? Or?
I have loved reading in my life, and it would take me a while to filter through that question. Yeah. But when I grew up, my parents were very conservative, and I lived a confined childhood and adolescence. And my memories are, on Thursday night, my parents would go grocery shopping, and next to the grocery store was the local library. And I'd go there and find 10 books and come home and spend the weekend going through my pile of books. And so I've read like a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it would take me longer to filter through all of those books.
Yeah, understood. But it's a great answer in the sense of I can imagine your world and how it was at home. And then your library, was this an island for you, like a place of a launching pad to wherever in your mind and your heart, you know?
Right. And whether or not it's true, I think that it's helped inform my work as a counseling astrologer in addressing the concerns of clients, because I filled my mind with the stories of people and their lives and their joys and their tragedies and their responses and their thinking and all of that. And it's all that vicarious sense of human experience that was part of what I think, maybe in retrospect, as I said, informed or I utilized client work. Yeah.
I'm a big library person, reader too. And what I could say, I'll say this as we end, if human beings didn't have myth and story, we'd have nothing. That is life, and that's what it is. And whether it's your favorite TV show or it was Star Wars or a classic book, this is how we run as humans. If we didn't have story and documented and read it to connect with who we are and have that reflection and mirror, then what else is there,
Right. Yeah. No, those stories that move us, that we read, it's because they are the archetypal dramas of the human experience. The myths are the basic stories that we live our lives through to come to a place of consciousness and realization. And just like plays, each theater group will give it its own variation, costuming and setting. But there are certain plays that endure. It's because they speak to the human condition.
Yes. Just for the people listening, for you, Demetra, I was broke in my Seattle days. I spent all my money on season tickets to the opera for like 5 years.
Oh my goodness, I love the opera.
Yeah, me too. My favorite part of the opera is, depending on, Verdi or whoever it was the overtures. Because depending if it was a long overture, the drapes were still closed and everybody's sitting out and the music started. And I was transfixed. Everybody in there, the ritual started. You were taken out of your world and you were into the story. Then the drapes open and the story begins. And so and not knowing what's going to happen, the mystery is everything too. We want to know. We have things reflected through story and myth and all that, but mystery is intertwined in it all. So, thanks for answering the bonus question. Formally, where can people find more about you, Demetra?
Formally, I do have a website of sorts, which is simple. My name, DemetraGeorge.com.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And then I also... Go ahead. Yeah, I also help promo here later on in December of 2023.
Yes.
You have a retreat in Palm Springs?
I have a retreat in Mythic Asteroids in Palm Springs. On the events, I guess, menu of my webpage, you can see information. But since we're talking, I'm also offering a class on how to calculate a chart by hand, starting in July through Astrology University. Mm-hmm. And my feeling is that the art of knowing how to hand calculate a chart is the most fundamental teaching of being an astrologer. And that for all of us who are dedicated to keeping the art alive, some of us should learn and then be able to pass that on, because it would be a tragedy at some point in the future if we no longer knew how to erect the chart.
Yeah, I agree with you. I remember doing this a long time ago with Lauren Albanian in her living room. Right. And the grind and the calculator. And I was breaking the pencils and pencil sharpeners.
The erasers.
But
it was a joy to start with the raw data, and then like an hour or 2 or 3 or however long it took you later to have the full drone chart with all of the planets and the aspect lines drawn in.
But how you connect to the chart while you're building it, too.
Right.
Like
you've totally embodied it viscerally before you ever talk to the person.
Yes.
And the process is a joy to participate in. So I'd like to be able to share that with others.
I like the way what you said, the process and the joy in it, because other times people are like, oh, this is a grind, but I know you, Demetra, and I know how you present, and I believe you in the joy in the process.
Yes.
So, and I will put those links in the show notes and so on and so forth. Demetra, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Okay. Pleasure as always speaking with you, Nicholas.